Welcome to Sleepy Owl. We are journeying to an era before written records, to a moment when humanity's dialogue with the natural world took a decisive and fiery turn. For hundreds of thousands of years, our story was written in stone. Life was shaped by the fracture lines of flint and obsidian, by the patient grinding of granite. But beneath the soil, within certain unassuming rocks, slept a latent potential. This potential awaited a catalyst, a combination of intense heat, keen observation, and perhaps a fortunate mistake. What followed was not a sudden flash of insight, but a slow, gathering dawn that would eventually illuminate a new age. This is the story of humanity's first great technological transformation, a shift so fundamental it redefined what was possible. How did this silent revolution begin? The earliest whispers of this change echoed in the mountainous landscapes of ancient Anatolia and the Caucasus. Here, over 7,000 years ago, people encountered peculiar green and blue stones that behaved unlike any other material. When struck, they didn't shatter but could be hammered into shape. This was native copper. Its initial use was modest, almost timid: small decorative beads, simple pins, tiny rings. It was a metal for adornment, not labor. Compared to a sharp-edged flint blade, this pure copper was frustratingly soft, bending under pressure, its edge quickly becoming blunt. For generations, it remained a supplementary material, a glittering accent to a world still dominated by stone and bone. The leap from ornament to instrument required mastering a fundamental force, not just fire, but controlled, concentrated inferno. The pivotal invention was the high-temperature furnace. In those early workshops, shrouded in smoke and heat, artisans learned to build clay ovens and force air through them with leather bellows. This created temperatures capable of a miraculous extraction, pulling liquid metal from solid rock. This process, smelting, was humanity's first true act of transmutation. It yielded copper, but the quest for a superior material continued, driven by trial, error, and the variable composition of ores. Then came the transformative accident. Copper ores from certain regions contained traces of other metals, like arsenic or, most importantly, tin. When these impurities melted together with copper in the crucible, the result was not just copper, but something entirely new. This new material was bronze. The alchemical key was the inclusion of tin. In the right proportion, around 1 part tin to 9 parts copper, the alloy underwent a dramatic change. It became significantly harder, capable of retaining a sharp cutting edge through repeated use. Even more crucially, it could be melted and cast, flowing into molds to take on complex, standardized shapes that stone could never achieve. This was the birth of a true technology. Archaeological sites like Arslantepe in eastern Turkey, dating back over 5,000 years, preserve the footprints of this revolution. Excavations reveal sophisticated workshop areas with furnaces designed to exceed 1,000 degrees Celsius, lined with heat-resistant clay. There are fragments of crucibles, nozzles for bellows, and stone molds. Here, the first specialized metalworkers, their skills honed over years, conducted their dangerous and revered craft. This profound knowledge did not spread quickly or uniformly. Its adoption was a slow seep, not a flood. We can trace this gradual integration at places like the immense Neolithic town of Catalhoyuk. In its deepest, oldest layers, every tool, every weapon, is crafted from obsidian or flint, materials traded over great distances. Metal, when it appears, is exclusively in the form of small copper beads or rings, trinkets of personal decoration. As centuries pass, the archaeological layers show copper beginning to serve more practical purposes. Awls, fishhooks, and small axes emerge. Yet, tellingly, these copper items are consistently found alongside the traditional toolkit of stone blades, scrapers, and projectile points. For a very long time, it was an era of technological duality. Why would a community abandon proven, accessible stone tools for a process that demanded rare materials, immense fuel, and specialized, secret knowledge? The answer lies not in simple practicality, but in the profound social change metalworking unleashed. The birth of metallurgy created the world's first true technical elite. Knapping stone was a communal skill. Smelting metal was an arcane discipline. It required the ability to identify specific ores, the strength to maintain blistering furnace temperatures for hours, and the guarded recipes for creating effective alloys. This concentrated extraordinary influence in the hands of a few. A chillingly beautiful testament to this new inequality was unearthed at the Varna burial complex in Bulgaria, a cemetery dating back over 6 millennia. Most graves are simple, accompanied by little more than a pottery vessel. But one burial, known as Grave 43, stops archaeologists in their tracks. It contains the remains of a man surrounded by a breathtaking array of gold artifacts, heavy bracelets, ornate appliques, a ceremonial axe. The weight of gold alone exceeds 3 pounds. Buried with him are copper tools and a stone hammer, the very instruments of the metalworker. This was no ordinary leader. He was likely a master of the new magic, his social power literally forged from metal. Further east, in the fertile plains of Mesopotamia, this link between metal and status became embedded in the very geography of early cities. At settlement sites, archaeologists discern a clear pattern. The larger, more complex residences, often with multiple rooms and courtyards, yield metal artifacts, tools, weapons, ornaments. The smaller, simpler dwellings contain only ceramics and stone tools. Access to metal objects, and by extension to the individuals who could produce them, was crystallizing as a primary marker of wealth, authority, and social division. The relatively flat social landscape of the Neolithic was being reshaped, its contours hardened by the control of technological secrets. A new structure of human society was being cast in the molds of Anatolia and Mesopotamia. But this was just the beginning. The true potential of bronze would only be unlocked when it fueled the ambitions of the world's first great urban civilizations. What empires would rise from these smoky forges? The true power of bronze was not merely in creating a better axe. Its real revolution was in enabling scale, coordination, and ambition on a level previously unimaginable. As the secret of alloying copper and tin solidified, it found its perfect catalyst in the river valleys of the ancient Near East. Here, in the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, a new form of human community was stirring, the city. And bronze was the material that would build it, defend it, and record its glory. This convergence of technology and social organization would ignite a cultural explosion whose light still faintly reaches us today. How did a metal become the backbone of civilization? In southern Mesopotamia, the world's first true city, Uruk, began its meteoric rise around the time bronze technology matured. By 3200 BC, it was a sprawling metropolis of mud brick and ambition, housing tens of thousands. At its heart stood massive temple complexes raised on artificial mountains of earth and rubble. Constructing such monuments required more than just manpower. It required organization, planning, and tools that could shape the world with precision. Bronze chisels could dress stone and carve wood with a consistency stone tools could not match. Bronze saws could cut timber for roofing and scaffolding. The very scale of Uruk was a testament to what metal-enhanced labor could achieve. But the city's greatness relied on more than construction. It relied on administration. Here, bronze played another, quieter role. The need to manage resources, to track the barley harvest, the wool yield, the distribution of metal to craftsmen, pushed the human mind to develop a system of permanent record-keeping. From this practical necessity, writing was born. The earliest clay tablets from Uruk are not poetry or history. They are inventories and accounts. They list quantities of grain, numbers of livestock, and allocations of copper and tin to specific workshops. The metal that built the city also created the bureaucracy to run it. Scribes, using reed styluses to press wedge-shaped marks into wet clay, became a new kind of specialist, as vital as the smith. Their cuneiform script began as an accounting tool for a Bronze Age economy, a direct link between metallurgy and the birth of written language. Yet, tin, the magical ingredient, was notoriously scarce. It was not found in the rich alluvial plains of Mesopotamia. This scarcity created history's first long-distance trade networks, ventures of extraordinary daring and complexity. To secure the tin needed for their bronze, Mesopotamian merchants looked to distant, mysterious lands. Sources in distant Anatolia, perhaps as far afield as Central Asia, became lifelines. This trade was not a casual exchange, it was systematic and vital. Standardized ingots of copper and tin, shaped like stretched ox hides for easy transport, moved along routes that connected continents. These ingots, often stamped with marks of origin and quality, were the currency of power. A city that controlled access to tin controlled the means of military and economic supremacy. This reality transformed warfare utterly. A bronze spearpoint was not just sharper than flint, it was a component in a new kind of army. It could be produced in identical batches, allowing for standardized equipment. It was durable, allowing for sustained training and combat. With bronze, weapons became systemized. The phalanx of infantry with identical long spears, the coordinated volleys of bronze-tipped arrows. These were inventions born from the reliable production of metal. Defensive architecture responded in kind. The walls of cities grew higher and thicker, designed to withstand new tools of siege. War was no longer a raid. It was a calculated enterprise of logistics and industry, all fueled by the bronze furnace. The social implications reverberated through every layer of society. The warrior who owned a full panoply of bronze armor, helmet, spear, sword, and shield was not just a fighter, he was a walking display of immense wealth and connections. His gear represented access to rare materials, specialized craftsmen, and far-flung trade. Burial sites from this period show this starkly. Elite tombs are crammed with bronze weaponry and gold, while common graves hold only pottery. A new aristocracy, defined by military prowess and control of metal, was entrenching itself. The smith himself occupied an ambiguous, powerful position. He was part chemist, part artist, part magician. His workshop was often situated near the palace walls, under the watchful eye and generous patronage of the ruler. His knowledge was his capital. This dynamic reached a stunning early peak in the lands of the Nile River. Egypt, protected by deserts and nourished by the river's predictable floods, developed a different model of Bronze Age kingship. Here, the pharaoh was not just a ruler who controlled metal. He was a god whose very essence was intertwined with its luminous, solar quality. The unification of Upper and Lower Egypt around 3100 BC is memorialized on the Narmer palette, a carved slate slab. It shows the king, wearing the dual crowns, wielding a massive ceremonial mace, ready to smite his enemy. While the palette itself is stone, its iconography celebrates the power that bronze represented, the power to unite, to conquer, and to impose order on chaos. In Egypt, bronze quickly became the material of the divine and the eternal. The tombs of early pharaohs at Abydos contained not just copper tools, but exquisite ceremonial daggers with golden handles, their blades forged from the most precious metal. The pharaoh's journey to the afterlife required equipment that would last for eternity, and bronze, resistant to corrosion, was the perfect medium. But Egypt's own copper sources were limited, and it had no tin. To become a true Bronze Age power, it too had to look outward, weaving itself into the same international web of exchange that connected Mesopotamia to Anatolia and beyond. The stage was now set for a sprawling, interconnected world, a cosmopolitan age where goods, ideas, and technologies flowed between glorious and competing kingdoms. What happened when these bronze-powered civilizations finally collided? Imagine a world not of isolated kingdoms, but of a thriving international system, where ships carrying copper from Cyprus traded with merchants bearing tin from Anatolia, where Babylonian textiles wrapped around alpine amber, and where diplomatic letters between kings crossed deserts and mountains. By the second millennium BC, the Bronze Age had matured into a globalized epic, a delicate web of interdependence that stretched from the Aegean Sea to the Indus Valley. This was not a simple time of primitive beginnings. It was an era of stunning sophistication and precarious connections. What held this ancient world together, and what hidden vulnerabilities lay beneath its glittering surface. At the heart of this system was a simple, inescapable geological fact. Tin was rare. Copper deposits existed in many places, Cyprus, Anatolia, the Sinai, but the tin needed to transform it into bronze was found in only a handful of locations. Perhaps Cornwall in Britain, certainly in parts of Central Asia and Afghanistan. This scarcity made trade not a luxury, but an absolute necessity for any power that wished to remain competitive. The resulting networks were astonishing in their reach. A single shipwreck off the southern coast of Turkey, known as the Uluburun Wreck, provides a breathtaking snapshot of this interconnected world. Sunk around 1300 BC, its wooden hull preserved in the deep silt, the ship's cargo was a microcosm of Bronze Age globalization. Within its hold were 10 tons of Cypriot copper ingots, shaped like ox hides for easy stacking. Alongside them were tin ingots, likely from Central Asia. There was ebony from Africa, ivory tusks, glass ingots from Mesopotamia, golden chalices, amber beads from the Baltic, and pottery from Cyprus and Canaan. This was not a royal vessel, but a merchant ship, a workhorse of international commerce. Its cargo list reads like an atlas of the ancient world. Every item on board represented a strand in the vast web that kept the Bronze Age turning. Kings and merchants from Egypt to Mesopotamia relied on the steady, dangerous journeys of such ships. Can you picture the bustling ports, the babble of languages, the careful weighing of ingots under the Mediterranean sun? This flow of goods was matched by a flow of ideas and people. Craftsmen traveled, bringing their techniques with them. Syrian metallurgists might find work in Egyptian workshops, introducing new designs for swords or improved methods for casting. Artistic styles blended and evolved. A gold cup found in Mycenaean Greece might show clear artistic influence from Minoan Crete, which itself borrowed motifs from Egypt. This was a cosmopolitan age, where a wealthy elite from different cultures shared certain tastes and status symbols, much like today's globalized world. The palace archives of great kings are filled with diplomatic correspondence, written on clay tablets in Akkadian, the lingua franca of the time. Letters exchange gifts, precious metals, fine garments, skilled slaves, and address fellow rulers as brother. They negotiate marriages, settle border disputes, and request urgent shipments of raw materials. The system had protocols, etiquette, and a shared understanding of how powerful states coexisted. But this brilliant interdependence contained the seeds of its own fragility. The entire edifice depended on stability, on safe sea lanes, on functioning royal governments that could secure mines and trade routes, on a climate that allowed for agricultural surplus to support the non-farming specialists. A shock to any part of the system could ripple through the entire network with devastating consequences. And the most vibrant, sophisticated node in this Western network was not on the mainland, but on an island shimmering in the middle of the Aegean Sea. This was Crete, home to the Minoan civilization. While Mesopotamian kings built ziggurats and Egyptian pharaohs erected pyramids, the Minoans created something different, a maritime mercantile empire based not on conquest, but on commercial genius and naval prowess. Their great palaces, like Knossos and Phaistos, were not fortified citadels but sprawling, multi-storied complexes built around central courtyards. They were airy, decorated with vivid frescoes of leaping dolphins, lithe athletes, and graceful flowers. Their architecture featured sophisticated plumbing, with terracotta pipes providing fresh water and draining waste, a level of comfort unmatched for over 1,000 years. The Minoans seemed less obsessed with war and more with trade, ceremony, and the beautification of life. Their power was their fleet. Minoan ships, with their high prows and square sails, dominated the eastern Mediterranean. They established trading posts and connections, bringing Cretan olive oil, wine, pottery, and exquisite metalwork to foreign ports, and carrying back metals, ivory, and other luxuries. They appear to have been the essential middlemen, the master connectors of the Bronze Age world. Their influence is seen in frescoes in Egyptian tombs that depict Minoan ambassadors bearing gifts, their distinctive dress and hairstyles carefully recorded. Their writing system, linear-A, remains undeciphered, a silent testament to their unique culture. They worshipped goddesses amidst double-headed axes, and their art captures a sense of movement and natural joy that feels strangely modern. For centuries, they thrived, a peaceful, wealthy hub in the restless ancient world. But the Mediterranean is a volatile place. Around 1600 BC, a cataclysm of almost unimaginable force struck the region. The volcanic island of Thera, north of Crete, exploded in one of the largest eruptions in human history. The blast was heard across continents. Tsunamis hundreds of feet high radiated out, devastating the northern coast of Crete and sweeping away its fleet and coastal settlements. Ash blanketed the island, smothering fields and poisoning the air. The elegant Minoan world was dealt a shattering blow from which it would never fully recover. Its palaces were damaged, its trade disrupted, its confidence broken. In the power vacuum that followed, a new, harder people from the Greek mainland began to cast their eyes southward. The age of the merchant was giving way to the age of the warrior. Who were these newcomers, and what world would they build from the ashes of the old? From the mainland of Greece, across the dark wine-colored sea, came a people of a starkly different character. While the Minoans of Crete had built a civilization of commerce and artistry, their neighbors to the north were forging a society organized for war. These were the Mycenaeans. Their name comes from their greatest citadel, Mycenae, a fortress of such imposing strength that later generations would believe it was built by a race of giants. Their world was one of massive stone walls, fortified hilltops, and warrior kings buried with their faces covered in gold. As the influence of quake-shaken Crete waned, these mainlanders stepped into the spotlight, adopting, adapting, and ultimately conquering. What kind of world did these warlords create? The Mycenaean citadels tell their own story. Mycenae itself is entered through the famous Lion Gate, an enormous stone doorway capped by a triangular slab carved with two lionesses flanking a column. The message is clear: power, majesty, and formidable defense. The walls are built of colossal, rough-hewn limestone blocks, fitted together with such weight and cunning that they seemed, to later Greeks, the work of the mythical Cyclopes. These were not open, welcoming palaces like Knossos. These were military command centers, storehouses, and redoubts designed to withstand siege. Within these walls, a new social order was crystallizing, one documented not in mysterious Linear A, but in a script we can read, Linear B. This was the Mycenaean masterstroke. They took the writing system of the Minoans and adapted it to write their own language, an early form of Greek. The clay tablets baked hard in the fires that later destroyed their palaces have survived, providing us with remarkably mundane and detailed records. These are not poems or myths, but palace inventories. They list chariot wheels, sets of armor, quantities of barley, and the names of workers. They reveal a society of breathtaking bureaucracy and rigid hierarchy, all geared towards sustaining military and economic power. The Wanax, or king, sat at the top, supported by a class of warrior aristocrats, the Hecatai, who owned the bronze chariots and the best weapons. Everything was accounted for, from the linen tunics issued to servants to the offerings of honey and oil made to the gods. The state controlled production, distribution, and trade with an iron grip. And at the heart of this system was bronze. Mycenaean Greece had little local copper and no tin. Their entire military apparatus depended on the fragile international trade networks. Linear B tablets meticulously record the disbursement of bronze to smiths in the palace workshops. They note when bronze is deficit or low, a cause for administrative concern. The smiths, working under state control, produced standardized weapons in large quantities: long, slashing swords with intricate hilts, heavy thrusting spears, and the iconic figure-8 shields made from layers of leather and bronze. Their most potent weapon was the chariot, a lightweight, two-wheeled war machine drawn by horses, a technology likely imported from the Hittites or Egyptians. The chariot was the tank of the Bronze Age, a mobile platform for a warrior armed with a composite bow or a bundle of javelins, capable of shattering infantry lines. The Mycenaeans were not just warriors. They were voracious traders and shrewd pirates, depending on one's perspective. Their distinctive pottery, stylized with octopuses, flowers, and geometric bands, has been found from Sicily to the Levant. They sailed the same sea lanes the Minoans once controlled, but with a more aggressive posture. Their tombs, deep stone-lined chambers called tholoi, speak of wealth plundered or traded from across the known world. The most famous of all, the so-called grave circle at Mycenae, contained golden death masks, inlaid bronze daggers showing lion hunts, cups of gold and silver, and amber from the Baltic. This was the treasure of a martial elite whose wealth was built on control of trade routes and the constant readiness for combat. This warrior ethos saturated their culture. Their art, compared to the flowing naturalism of the Minoans, is more formal, more focused on scenes of hunting and battle. Their legends, passed down orally for centuries before being written as the epics of Homer, are tales of heroes, quests, and colossal sieges, echoes of their own world. The great epic, the Iliad, with its focus on the siege of a wealthy Anatolian city, the anger of a great warrior, and the interventions of the gods, is a Bronze Age memory fossilized in poetry. It is a world of bronze-clad champions dueling before the walls, of kings arguing over spoils, of everything resting on personal honor and martial prowess. For nearly 3 centuries, the Mycenaean palace states flourished. They corresponded with Hittite emperors and Egyptian pharaohs as equals. They exported olive oil and pottery, imported ivory and gold. Their system, though rigid, worked. But it was a system under constant, invisible strain. It demanded a constant inflow of bronze, which demanded stable international relations. It required agricultural surplus to feed its specialists, the soldiers, scribes, and smiths. It depended on the central authority of the Wanaks to keep the whole complex machine running. What would happen if the flow of tin was suddenly cut? If the harvests failed? If the palace itself burned? The Mycenaean world was a magnificent, but brittle, construction. And at the height of its power, far to the east, another Bronze Age civilization was reaching a zenith of a completely different kind, one built not on fortifications, but on breathtaking urban planning and mysterious harmony. Where was this other great power, and why does it remain so enigmatic? While Mycenaean kings amassed gold and Hittite emperors marshaled chariot armies, a civilization of astonishing order and precision was reaching its mature glory over 2,000 miles to the east. In the vast, fertile floodplain of the Indus River, in what is now Pakistan and northwest India, cities arose that defy many of our assumptions about the ancient world. Here were no towering pyramids, no grandiose palaces crammed with weaponry, no colossal statues of boastful kings. Instead, the people of the Indus Valley civilization, also known as the Harappan culture, built their society on a different set of principles: standardization, sanitation, and a seemingly radical sense of civic planning. What secrets did this silent, sophisticated world hold? The twin capitals of this civilization, Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, are marvels of Bronze Age engineering. Mohenjo-daro, the larger of the two, covered an area of over 600 acres and may have housed 40,000 people at its peak around 2500 BC. Its most striking feature is not a temple or a fortress, but its layout. The city was built on a precise grid plan, with main streets running straight north-south and east-west, wide enough for 2 carts to pass. This was not organic growth. This was a master plan executed with mathematical certainty. But the true genius lay beneath the streets. The Harappans constructed the most advanced drainage and sanitation system of the ancient world, one that would not be rivaled until the height of the Roman Empire. Every house, large or small, was connected to a covered network of brick-lined drains that ran along the streets. These channels fed into larger sewers, all equipped with manholes for maintenance. Wastewater was channeled out of the city to settling tanks. Individual homes often had their own bathrooms with brick floors and chutes that drained directly into this system. At the heart of Mohenjo-daro stands the Great Bath, a large, watertight pool lined with bitumen, fed by a dedicated well and drained by a corbelled arch outlet. This was likely a place for ritual purification, a center of both spiritual and civic life. The entire design speaks of a profound communal investment in public health and order. What kind of authority could orchestrate such uniform construction across hundreds of miles and multiple centuries? The standardization is breathtaking. Bricks across the entire civilization, from the mountains of Afghanistan to the coast of Gujarat, were fired to a consistent ratio, 4:2:1 in length, width, and thickness. Their system of weights was binary, based on a unit of about 13.7 grams, and these perfectly cubed stone weights have been found from tiny fractions to massive multiples, ensuring fair trade from one city to another. This uniformity suggests a strong central idea, a cultural blueprint so powerful it transcended local rulers. Yet, archaeologists have found no evidence of a king, no grandiose royal palace, no temples that clearly dominate the skyline. The largest structures are granaries and the Great Bath, buildings that served communal, not exclusively elite, functions. Their mastery of bronze was equal to their mastery of brick. Harappan metallurgists produced exquisite lost wax castings, like the famous dancing girl statue from Mohenjo-daro, a slender, confident figure caught in mid-movement, her arm weighted with bangles. They alloyed copper with tin from distant Afghanistan to create tools of perfect hardness. But they also created art, intricate bronze figurines of carts and animals, and beautiful jewelry using techniques like filigree and granulation. Their most iconic artifacts are their seals. Thousands of small, square steatite seals have been found, each carved with a beautiful, naturalistic animal, a unicorn-like beast, a humped bull, an elephant, and a short line of mysterious script. And here lies the great, enduring enigma: their writing. The Indus script appears on seals, pottery, and copper plates. It consists of over 400 distinct signs, but the inscriptions are frustratingly short, usually just 4 or 5 characters. Despite decades of effort and sophisticated computer analysis, it remains undeciphered. We cannot hear their voices. We don't know their kings' names, their gods' names, or their word for river. This silence makes their achievements seem even more remarkable and alien. They built a civilization that appears, from the archaeological record, to have been remarkably egalitarian and peaceful. There are no obvious fortifications at Mohenjo-daro or Harappa for centuries. Weapons are rare in the archaeological record, especially compared to the armories of Mesopotamia or Mycenae. Was this a utopian Bronze Age society? They were not isolated. Harappan seals have been found in Mesopotamian cities like Ur, and Mesopotamian cylinder seals and carnelian beads appear in Indus Valley sites. They had a massive dockyard at their coastal city of Lathel, complete with locks to control water levels for shipping. They traded cotton cloth, a unique invention, for lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, copper from Oman, and perhaps tin from Central Asia. They were full participants in the Bronze Age world, yet they seemed to walk a different path within it. Then, around 1900 BC, this magnificent, orderly world began to unravel. The great cities were not destroyed in violent conflagrations like those of the Mycenaeans or Hittites. Instead, they were slowly, agonizingly abandoned. The quality of construction declined. The meticulous grids broke down. The writing disappeared. The trade networks faded. The people seemed to have left their grand cities and dispersed into smaller, simpler villages. What could cause such a thorough, quiet collapse? The evidence points not to invasion, but to an environmental betrayal. The lifeblood of the civilization, the Indus River system, began to change course. Tectonic shifts may have diverted rivers, causing catastrophic floods in some areas and turning others into parched land. The reliable monsoon patterns may have weakened. The agricultural foundations simply crumbled away. The great experiment in urban living, built on standardization and communal effort, could not withstand the failure of its environment. The people moved on, their script forgotten, their cities buried in silt for millennia. Their legacy lived on in subtle ways, in agricultural techniques, in artistic motifs, perhaps in spiritual concepts that filtered into later Indian cultures. But their distinct vision of civilization, a vision without obvious kings or conquest, faded into the dust. As the Indus cities fell silent, another Bronze Age power on the opposite side of the world was achieving a dazzling, contrasting fluorescence, one obsessed with divinity, eternity, and the absolute power of a single ruler. Where did this spectacular vision of kingship reach its most perfect expression? Far from the grid-patterned streets of the Indus, in a narrow, green ribbon of land surrounded by relentless desert, a civilization was perfecting a very different dream. In Egypt, the Bronze Age was not just a technological phase. It was the medium through which the universe itself was ordered. Here, the pharaoh was not merely a king who controlled metal. He was the divine engine of creation, the guarantor of the Nile's annual flood, the living bridge between the people and the gods. And bronze, with its golden sheen and enduring nature, became the sacred material for enacting this eternal truth. How did a metal help build a vision of immortality? The Egyptian journey with metal began with reverence for the cosmic. Their earliest significant metal objects were often crafted not from smelted copper, but from meteoric iron, which they called metal from the sky. This celestial origin made it more precious than gold, suitable only for the most sacred royal rituals. But as they mastered bronze, they imbued it with similar divine significance. Bronze did not corrode like iron, it gained a beautiful patina. In a culture obsessed with permanence and defeating decay, bronze was the perfect material for objects meant to last for eternity. The tools for the afterlife, the vessels for offerings, the weapons to defend the soul in the hereafter. This obsession with eternity found its ultimate expression in stone, but bronze was the indispensable tool that made it possible. The transition from the stepped pyramid of Djoser at Saqqara to the smooth-sided marvels at Giza was a story of architectural ambition enabled by metallurgy. To quarry, shape, and position millions of limestone and granite blocks, Egyptian craftsmen needed tools that could maintain a sharp edge through days of punishing work. Bronze chisels, hardened with just the right amount of tin, could be resharpened and used relentlessly. Bronze saws, with abrasive sand as a cutting agent, could slice through granite. Bronze-capped levers and rockers helped nudge multi-ton blocks into perfect alignment. The pyramids are monuments of stone, but they are also testaments to the organizing power of Bronze Age logistics and the cutting edge of bronze tools. The Old Kingdom pharaohs who built these tombs were the CEOs of history's first great state-run enterprise. To feed, house, and direct the thousands of laborers, scribes, and overseers, they developed a bureaucracy as precise as the pyramid's geometry. Scribes recorded everything on papyrus, allocations of copper and tin to workshops, daily bread rations for work gangs, the output of quarrymen. The state controlled the mines in the Sinai for copper and conducted diplomatic missions to secure tin from the Levant or beyond. The entire economy was geared toward these monumental projects that cemented the god-king's power in this life and guaranteed his journey in the next. The pyramid was not a tomb, it was a resurrection machine, and bronze was part of its mechanism. But Egyptian civilization was not static. After a period of fragmentation, it reunified and entered its Middle Kingdom, a classical age of literature, confidence, and expansion. Pharaohs now led armies south into Nubia, not just for conquest, but to control the gold mines that fueled their economy and diplomacy. Massive mud brick fortresses were built along the Nile, their gates and fittings strengthened with bronze. The Middle Kingdom was Egypt's Renaissance, a time when the lessons of the Old Kingdom were applied with more refined artistry and broader horizons. Then, disaster struck from an unexpected direction. Around 1650 BC, a foreign people known as the Hyksos, rulers of foreign lands, swept into the Nile Delta from the Levant. They did not come with overwhelming numbers, but with overwhelming technological advantages. The composite bow, the horse-drawn chariot, and superior bronze weapons and armor. For the first time, Egypt's natural desert barriers had failed. The Hyksos established a capital in the delta, ruling the north while native Egyptian dynasties held the south. It was a humiliating, fractious period. Yet, this invasion was also a brutal lesson. The Egyptians, proud and insular, were forced to confront the military innovations of the wider Bronze Age world. They learned quickly. In the crucible of resistance, a new militant Egypt was forged. Native princes from Thebes studied Hyksos technology, adopted the chariot, improved their bronze working, and organized professional armies. Around 1550 BC, the pharaoh Ahmose I led a war of liberation, using the invaders' own weapons against them. He expelled the Hyksos and launched a campaign of conquest that would initiate the new kingdom, Egypt's Age of Empire. This was no longer a civilization looking inward, focused solely on the afterlife. This was a warrior state, eager to project its power across the known world. The pharaoh was now a conquering hero, a living god of battle. The supreme expression of this new imperial ethos was Thutmose III, often called the Napoleon of ancient Egypt. His campaigns extended Egyptian control from deep in Nubia to the banks of the Euphrates River in Syria. His victory at the Battle of Megiddo is a masterpiece of Bronze Age strategy, recorded in meticulous detail by his royal scribes. Thutmose used the chariot corps, now the elite striking arm of his army, to outmaneuver a coalition of Canaanite princes. The loot was staggering. Thousands of chariots, horses, and vast quantities of bronze weapons that would equip his forces for years. Egypt became the superpower of the late Bronze Age, its wealth and influence unrivaled. To celebrate this new world-spanning power, the pharaohs built on a colossal scale. The temple complexes at Karnak and Luxor became stone forests of columns, their surfaces carved with scenes of military triumph and divine favor. Bronze was everywhere, in the massive doors sheathed with metal, in the statues adorned with gold and bronze details, in the weapons and armor of the royal guards. The pharaoh now needed to control not just the Nile, but the trade routes that brought tin from the north and gold from the south. Egypt sat at the center of a web, its power radiating outward. Yet, at the very height of this imperial splendor, a rival was rising in the north, a kingdom of hardy mountain warriors and master charioteers who would challenge Egypt's supremacy in a clash of Bronze Age titans. Who were these formidable rivals, and what happened when these two empires met? To the north of the Fertile Crescent, in the rugged highlands of Anatolia, a kingdom of a different temperament was consolidating its power. These were the Hittites, a people who spoke an Indo-European language and worshipped a storm god with furious intensity. While Egypt gloried in the sun-drenched certainty of the Nile, the Hittite world was one of mountains, fortresses, and political cunning. They did not build pyramids, they built archives. Their capital, Hattusa, was a sprawling citadel of cyclopean walls and secret tunnels, perched on a windswept plateau. And they held a technological secret that would give them an edge in the brutal politics of the age. They were the masters of iron. But in a world still dominated by bronze, how did this secret shape their rise to empire? Initially, the Hittites treated iron not as a utilitarian metal, but as a precious, almost magical substance. Their early iron artifacts are ceremonial daggers and ornaments, gifts fit for kings. The technology was a state secret, closely guarded. The iron they first mastered came from meteors, fire from the sky, which added to its mystical aura. To produce it from terrestrial or required furnaces that could reach unthinkably high temperatures, a fuel-intensive and difficult process. So, for warfare and daily life, they relied on the established bronze technology, becoming superb practitioners of it. Their chariots were lighter and faster than most, their infantry disciplined. But the knowledge of iron smelting was their strategic reserve, a hidden card to be played later. Their true genius, however, was administrative and legal. The Hittites were meticulous record keepers. Their cuneiform tablets, written in their own language and in Akkadian for diplomacy, fill vast archives. They created one of history's earliest known constitutional monarchies, where the king's power was checked by a council of nobles, the Panku. Their law codes were notable for their emphasis on restitution over retaliation, fines rather than mutilation. This was a society that valued order, contracts, and cold calculation. It made them formidable diplomats and ruthless opportunists. Their empire grew through a combination of military force and shrewd alliance building. They clashed with the Hurrian kingdom of Mitanni to their southeast and eventually reduced it to a vassal state. Their gaze then turned south, toward the wealthy, fractured city-states of Syria and the Levant. This brought them into the sphere of influence of the one power that could match them, New Kingdom Egypt. The Levant was the crossroads of the world, a land of lucrative trade routes and fortified cities. Control of it meant control of the flow of tin, copper, timber, and other vital goods. A clash between the Hittite land empire and the Egyptian maritime-turned-territorial empire was inevitable. The spark was the city of Kadesh, a strategic fortress on the Orontes River in modern-day Syria. It changed hands between the Egyptian and Hittite spheres of influence for decades. Around 1274 BC, the two superpowers committed their full might to decide its fate. The Egyptian pharaoh, Ramesses II, marched north with 4 divisions of infantry and chariotry, perhaps 20,000 men in total. The Hittite king, Muad'Ali II, assembled a larger coalition force, drawing on vassals from across Anatolia and Syria. What followed was the largest chariot battle in history, a swirling, chaotic melee of thousands of metal-clad vehicles. Ramesses, young and confident, nearly led his army into a catastrophic ambush. Hittite chariots, heavier and carrying 3 men, a driver, a shield-bearer, and a warrior, instead of the Egyptian two, smashed into his divided forces. Egyptian accounts, carved triumphantly on temple walls, tell how Ramesses, abandoned by his routed troops, single-handedly held off the Hittite host with the help of the god Ammonius. The reality was likely a near disaster salvaged by the timely arrival of Egyptian reinforcements. The battle was a bloody stalemate. Neither side could claim a decisive victory. Kadesh remained in Hittite hands, but both armies were too battered to continue. The outcome was something unprecedented in the Bronze Age, a formal peace treaty between equals. Exhausted by decades of warfare and facing new threats on their frontiers, Ramesses II and the new Hittite king, Hattusili III, negotiated a remarkable document. Carved in silver and exchanged between the courts, the Egyptian-Hittite peace treaty established boundaries, a non-aggression pact, and a mutual defense agreement. It even included clauses for the extradition of political refugees. It was a diplomatic masterpiece born of mutual exhaustion and respect. For a time, it brought stability to the core of the Bronze Age world. But this hard-won peace at the center was masking a gathering storm at the edges. The very interconnectedness that made the late Bronze Age so brilliant also made it vulnerable. The economies of Egypt, the Hittites, the Mycenaeans, and the Levantine cities were now deeply interdependent. They all relied on the same trade routes for tin, copper, and luxury goods. They all required stable harvests to support their urban populations and professional militaries. What would happen if those lifelines were suddenly severed? What if a wave of disruption, originating from the forgotten corners of the map, swept toward this comfortable, complacent world of kings and treaties? Even as Ramesses II carved his colossal statues at Abu Simbel, proclaiming an eternity of power, the foundations were cracking. In the arid reaches beyond the Levant, among the islands of the Aegean, and in the forests of the Balkans, populations were on the move. Driven by drought, hunger, or simply the lure of wealth, they began to press against the borders of the great kingdoms. The Hittite archives record desperate pleas from vassal cities in western Anatolia, reporting attacks by mysterious raiders from the sea. Egyptian inscriptions start to mention troubling encounters with confederations of foreign peoples in islands in the midst of the sea. The system was experiencing shocks it was not designed to absorb. The delicate balance of the Age of Bronze was about to be shattered. Who were these mysterious disruptors, and why did their arrival signal the end of an entire world order? The first cracks in the Golden Age appeared not in the grand capitals, but on the vulnerable coasts and in the correspondence between frightened officials. In the dusty archives of the Hittite capital, tablets from the empire's twilight years tell a story of creeping dread. A letter from a governor in western Anatolia pleads for reinforcements, describing attacks by swift ships whose crews come from the sea, and their number is limitless. Another, from the king of Ugarit, a wealthy Syrian port, to the ruler of Cyprus, begs for help as enemy vessels are sighted. My father, behold, the enemy's ships came, my cities were burned, and they did evil things in my country. The reply is chilling in its helplessness. What can I say? My own land is also being ravaged. This was not a war between known kingdoms. It was a systemic failure, an avalanche of chaos. Historians would later give a name to these elusive agents of collapse, the Sea Peoples. Who were they? The term itself comes from Egyptian accounts, a catch-all phrase for a confederation of different groups that swept across the eastern Mediterranean in the late 13th and early 12th centuries BC. Egyptian temple reliefs show them with distinctive feathered headdresses, horned helmets, and round shields. Their names are listed in inscriptions: the Peleset, the Jeker, the Shikalesh, the Denyen. These names echo later groups like the Philistines, Peleset, and possibly the Sickles, Shikalesh, suggesting some of these peoples were displaced populations from the Aegean world, Anatolia, and perhaps even Italy, set in motion by a chain reaction of disasters. They were not a unified army, but a tidal wave of migration, piracy, and desperation crashing against the shores of settled kingdoms. Their impact was catastrophic because they attacked a system already under profound stress. The late Bronze Age world was like a complex machine where every part depended on every other. The Mycenaean palaces needed Egyptian gold and Anatolian tin. The Hittites needed grain from Syria. This all required peace, safe sea lanes, and functioning governments. Now, multiple pressures converged. A prolonged period of drought and cooling temperatures, evidenced by tree rings and pollen samples, struck the eastern Mediterranean. Harvests failed, famine threatened, and populations of pastoralists and farmers were forced to move, colliding with their neighbors and triggering chain migrations. At the same time, the vital trade routes disintegrated. Piracy made the seas unnavigable. The copper mines of Cyprus were attacked. The overland routes through Anatolia were cut. Suddenly, the lifeblood of bronze, tin, stopped flowing reliably. Palace workshops from Greece to Syria found their supplies dwindling. Without bronze, armies could not be re-equipped, tools could not be replaced. The very material that defined the age was becoming inaccessible. The response was a vicious cycle. As central authority weakened, local governors and warlords hoarded resources, further fragmenting political power and making coordinated defense impossible. One by one, the great centers fell. The Hittite Empire, strained by famine and internal succession disputes, collapsed with stunning speed. Its capital, Hattusa, was not conquered in a great siege, but abandoned and burned by its own rulers, the archives deliberately baked in the fires to preserve the state's secrets forever. In Greece, the mighty citadels of Mycenae, Pylos, and Tiryns were consumed by fire. The linear B script disappeared, and with it, the complex bureaucracy that had run the palace economies. The Syrian city-states, Ugarit, Alalak, Emar, were utterly destroyed, their ruins left unoccupied for centuries. It was not a war, it was a civilizational unraveling. Only Egypt, behind its desert barriers and under the formidable leadership of Pharaoh Ramesses III, managed to mount a successful, last-ditch defense. The reliefs at his mortuary temple at Medinet Habu show a desperate, epic struggle. In a great naval battle in the Nile Delta, Egyptian archers on ships and shore repel an invasion fleet of Sea Peoples vessels. On land, Egyptian infantry and chariots cut down armies of invaders. Ramesses III claims, they were dragged in, enclosed, and prostrated on the beach, slain, made into heaps. Egypt survived, but at a terrible cost. It was bled dry, its foreign holdings lost, and it retreated into isolation. The age of empire was over. In the smoldering aftermath, the world was unrecognizable. The international network was gone. Literacy vanished from most regions. The sophisticated art of fresco writing and fine stone carving was lost. Population levels plummeted. Survivors abandoned the Great Plains and coastlines for easily defensible hilltops. The knowledge of how to construct a corbelled arch or a drainage system faded. This was not a transition, but a profound forgetting, a true dark age. Yet, in this widespread ruin, new forces were stirring. In the highlands of Anatolia and Iran, communities that had been on the periphery of the Bronze Age empires began to thrive. Freed from the dominance of the great powers and armed with a crucial technological insight, they started to forge their future from a different, far more common metal. The secret the Hittites had guarded so closely, the smelting of iron from terrestrial ore, began to diffuse. Iron ore was everywhere, in almost every hill. You didn't need a vast trade network, you needed a good furnace and knowledge. In a world where tin was now a distant memory, iron was the democratic metal. The collapse of the Bronze Age order had cleared the ground, painfully, for a revolution that would be even more transformative. What would rise from the ashes of the palaces? Out of the silence and the scattered ashes, a new rhythm began, slow and stubborn as a sprout pushing through cracked earth. The great webs of connection were severed, the palaces were hollow ruins, but humanity endured. People gathered in smaller, tighter communities, often on defensible hilltops, their eyes scanning the horizon not for trade ships, but for threats. Life became local, simpler, and harder. The glittering age of international diplomacy and standardized luxury was replaced by an era of subsistence, isolation, and a crucial, gradual rediscovery. In this stripped-down world, the future was being forged not with rare tin, but with the most common metal in the Earth's crust, iron. How did the metal of the forgotten become the key to a new beginning? The secret of iron had never been entirely lost. The Hittites had guarded it, treating it as a precious royal metal. But with the collapse of their empire, the knowledge dispersed. Smiths and their families, displaced and seeking patronage, carried the technology with them. The process was difficult. Smelting iron required even higher temperatures than bronze, over 1,500 degrees Celsius, hot enough to begin to soften the metal so it could form a spongy bloom mixed with slag. This bloom then had to be reheated and hammered repeatedly to drive out the impurities, a labor-intensive process called forging. Early iron was often no better than good bronze. It could be softer and more prone to rust. So why bother? The answer was accessibility. Tin deposits were rare and remote. Iron ore, however, was ubiquitous. You could find it in bogs as bog iron, in surface deposits across Europe, Anatolia, and beyond. A community no longer needed to maintain fragile alliances stretching thousands of miles to arm itself. They needed a skilled smith, a good source of charcoal, and a local or deposit. This democratized metal production. Power could now be built locally, from local resources. It was a technological shift that perfectly suited a fragmented world. The true breakthrough that made iron superior was the discovery of steelmaking, intentionally adding carbon to the iron during the smelting or forging process. Through experiment, smiths learned that heating iron in a charcoal fire for a prolonged time allowed carbon to absorb into the metal, creating a much harder material. They then discovered quenching, plunging the red-hot steel into water or oil to lock in extreme hardness. This, however, could make the metal brittle. So they developed tempering, gently reheating the quenched steel to restore some flexibility. This delicate dance of heat and chemistry, mastered over generations, produced weapons that could hold a sharper edge than bronze and tools that were more durable. The age of iron had truly begun, not with a bang, but with the steady, ringing blows of the village smithy. This new technology did not instantly create new empires. For centuries, what scholars call the Dark Ages, or Early Iron Age, was a time of small-scale societies. In Greece, the grand Mycenaean halls were replaced by clusters of simple huts. The art of writing was forgotten, but the oral traditions kept the memory of the lost age alive, stories of heroes and wars that would eventually become the bedrock of Homeric epic. In this quieter world, without the overbearing control of a central palace, new forms of social organization were able to germinate. The polis, the independent Greek city-state, with its concepts of citizenship and shared governance, began its slow development in this Iron Age context. Across the Mediterranean, another group seized the opportunity presented by the power vacuum: the Phoenicians. Descendants of the Canaanite city-states that had been crushed in the Bronze Age collapse, they inhabited the narrow coastal strip of modern-day Lebanon. With no vast hinterland for agriculture, they turned to the sea, not as raiders, but as the new master traders and explorers of the Iron Age. They perfected shipbuilding, constructing vessels capable of long ocean voyages. Most importantly, they revolutionized communication. They took the cumbersome writing systems of the Bronze Age and distilled them into a simple 22-letter alphabet based purely on sounds. This was a technology of staggering efficiency. It required far less training to learn than cuneiform or hieroglyphics, spreading literacy beyond the scribal elite. Armed with this alphabet and their ships, the Phoenicians became the reweavers of the Mediterranean world. They established trading colonies from Cyprus to Sicily to North Africa and as far west as Spain. Their most famous colony, Carthage, would later become an empire in its own right. They traded in purple dye, glass, timber, and silver, and they carried the alphabet with them. The Greeks adopted and adapted it, adding vowels. This Phoenician gift would become the foundation of nearly every major writing system in the Western world. In the ashes of the top-down Bronze Age systems, a new, more flexible and decentralized network of exchange was being built. Meanwhile, in the hills of Judah and Israel, small kingdoms were consolidating, their stories and laws now recorded in a new medium: affordable, portable scrolls, written in a script derived from the Phoenician alphabet. The great theological and ethical concepts that would shape much of the world were being codified in this Iron Age context, a response to the turmoil and search for meaning that followed the collapse of the old cosmic order of the pharaohs and great kings. The Iron Age was not merely a poorer sequel to the Bronze Age. It was a recalibration. The collapse stripped away layers of centralized complexity, allowing for new ideas, democratic governance, alphabetic literacy, monotheistic thought, to take root in the fertile, if rocky, soil of a simpler world. The metal that defined it was not the elite bronze of the palace, but the practical, democratic iron of the village and the frontier. The stage was being set for a different kind of drama, one starring city-states, prophets, and citizen soldiers, rather than god-kings and vast imperial bureaucracies. But what of the vast continent of Asia? Did it experience this same cataclysmic rupture, or was it walking a separate, parallel path through the Age of Metal? While the Mediterranean world convulsed in collapse and rebirth east of the formidable mountains and deserts of Central Asia, another Bronze Age civilization was following its own celestial rhythm. In the valley of the Yellow River, ancient China developed its relationship with metal in profound isolation from the dramas of the West. There was no trade in tin with Mesopotamia, no invasions by sea peoples. Instead, Chinese metallurgy unfolded as an indigenous invention, leading to a bronze culture that was uniquely obsessed with ritual, ancestry, and the mandate of heaven. How did a metal become the voice of the spirits and the anchor of the state? The story begins with the legendary Xia dynasty, long considered myth until archaeological discoveries at a site called Erlitou revealed a sophisticated Bronze Age society at the right time and place. At Erlitou, dating to around 1800 BC, archaeologists found the footprints of a palace on a raised platform, workshops for bronze and turquoise, and the earliest ritual vessels. But Chinese bronze took a different technical path. Instead of the lost wax casting popular in the West, Chinese artisans pioneered piece mold casting. They would create a clay model of the desired vessel, encase it in clay to make a mold, cut the mold into sections, remove the model, and then reassemble the mold to pour in the molten bronze. This complex method allowed for the creation of vessels with incredibly sharp, intricate surface decoration, Taotai masks, dragon patterns, geometric spirals, that would have been impossible with other techniques. These were not weapons or tools first and foremost. They were ritual vessels, ding cauldrons for cooking sacrificial meat, gui bowls for holding grain offerings, dew pourers for warming ritual wine. Their primary function was to communicate with the ancestors. The ruling elite believed that the spirits of their forebears held the power to influence the world of the living, bringing good harvests, ensuring military victory, maintaining cosmic order. The bronze vessel was the medium for this communication. During elaborate ceremonies, food and wine prepared in these magnificent containers were offered to the ancestors. The very act, performed with the correct ritual and the most exquisite, resonant vessels, maintained the harmony between heaven, earth, and humankind. This gave Chinese bronze a different material signature. While Western bronze for tools aimed for 10% tin for hardness, Chinese ritual bronze often contained 15 to 25% tin. This high tin content gave the metal a beautiful golden hue and, crucially, a sonorous ring when struck. The vessels were not just for show, they were for sound and spectacle. The acoustics of the ritual were part of its power. Controlling this sacred technology became the exclusive privilege of the ruling class. To possess the vessels was to have the right to speak to the powers that governed reality. This system crystallized under the Shang dynasty, centered at the great city of Inshu, modern Anyang. Shang kings were warrior priests. Their power was demonstrated through two parallel streams: military prowess and ritual correctness. Oracle bones, the shoulder blades of oxen or turtle plastrons, record this duality. The king or his diviners would inscribe a question on the bone: will the harvest be abundant? Should we attack the Chang tribe next week? A hot bronze rod was applied, causing the bone to crack. The pattern of the cracks was interpreted as the ancestor's answer, which was then recorded on the same bone. These archives provide a direct, astonishing window into the concerns of a Bronze Age king, from warfare and weather to toothaches and childbearing. The Shang royal tombs, like that of the powerful consort Fu Hao, reveal a society capable of staggering material wealth and human sacrifice. Fu Hao's tomb, intact when discovered, contained over 460 bronze objects, 750 jade pieces, and 6,800 cowrie shells, a form of currency. It also contained the skeletons of 16 humans, likely servants or prisoners of war sent to serve her in the afterlife. The bronze in her tomb was not for an army, but for eternal ritual: massive cauldrons, elaborate wine servers, and bells. The Shang were eventually overthrown by the Zhou, who from their western frontier marched in and claimed the mandate of heaven, the idea that heaven bestowed the right to rule on the virtuous and withdrew it from the corrupt. The Zhou used this ideology to justify their conquest. To govern their vast new territory, they implemented a feudal system, granting land to loyal nobles in exchange for military service and tribute. And the symbol of this political contract? Bronze vessels. The Zhou king would bestow inscribed bronze vessels upon his vassals, recording the grant of land and title. The vessel itself became a legal document and a sacred heirloom, proof of a family's noble status and its contract with the dynasty. Zhou bronzes became even more elaborate, their inscriptions longer, chronicling battles, grants, and prayers. The technology also advanced. They began casting enormous sets of graduated bronze bells, like those found in the tomb of Marquis of Zheng. These bianzhong could produce a complete range of musical notes and were used in elaborate state rituals. The creation of a perfectly tuned bell set represents a zenith of Bronze Age metallurgy, combining precise chemistry, acoustics, and artistic grandeur. While the Zhou world was ritually unified by bronze, it was also politically fragmenting, leading to the chaotic but intellectually vibrant Warring States period. Yet the foundational idea remained, that social order, cosmic order, and metal were inextricably linked. This was a Bronze Age that looked inward to the ancestral past and upward to heaven, rather than outward to a network of trading partners. It created a continuity of culture and ideology so powerful that it would shape Chinese civilization for millennia, all without any knowledge of the pharaohs or the palace of Knossos. As China refined its ritual order, what was happening in the vast, cold forests and plains of Europe? Was it merely a backwater, or was it brewing its own distinctive Bronze Age dreams? Far from the ritual altars of China and the sun-baked palaces of the Mediterranean, across the dense forests and river valleys of Europe, the Bronze Age unfolded to a different rhythm. Here, there were no vast bureaucratic states, no god-kings commanding millions of bricks. Instead, power was distributed among chieftains, their authority measured in bronze, amber, and the loyalty of warriors. The European Bronze Age was a mosaic of interconnected cultures, linked not by imperial decree, but by the flow of rivers, the tracks through forests, and the daring of travelers who carried ideas as precious as metal. What kind of worlds were built in this decentralized landscape? It began with a movement and a distinctive pot. Around 2800 BC, a cultural phenomenon archaeologists call the bell beaker culture spread across Western and Central Europe. Named for their elegant, bell-shaped drinking vessels, these people were also among Europe's first widespread metalworkers. They were mobile, connected, and buried their dead with a standardized kit: a beaker, a copper dagger, archery equipment with stone wrist guards, and sometimes gold ornaments. The famous Amesbury archer, buried near Stonehenge around 2300 BC, was one of these people. Analysis of his teeth showed he grew up in the Alps, but he was buried with copper knives from distant sources. He was a man of the new, connected Europe, where individuals and ideas traveled astonishing distances. The real engine of this connectivity was a simple, desperate need: tin. Europe had copper in abundance, in the Alps, in Spain, in the British Isles. But the tin needed to make bronze was found in only a few places, notably Cornwall in southwestern Britain and in the Erzgebirge Mountains between Germany and the Czech Republic. This scarcity created arteries of trade that shaped the continent. Amber from the Baltic coast, a magical golden substance, traveled south to the Mediterranean, while bronze goods and techniques traveled north. These were not formal trade empires, but networks of exchange, where prestige goods and technological knowledge circulated among local elites, enhancing their status. In the north, around the Baltic and North Seas, the Nordic Bronze Age flourished from about 1700 BC. Without rich soils for massive agriculture, these societies built their wealth on control of trade and metallurgical skill. Their most stunning artifacts come not from grand tombs, but from sacred bogs, offerings to the gods. The Trundholm sun chariot, a bronze horse pulling a gilded sun disk on wheels, is a masterpiece of cosmology and craftsmanship. Elaborate bronze horns called luz, with their haunting, echoing tones, were played in ceremonies. Their rock art, pecked into stone surfaces, shows ships with towering prows, sun symbols, and processions of warriors, a visual prayer for safe voyages and military success, forever etched into the landscape. Further south, in Central Europe, the Umfield culture emerged around 1300 BC, named for their shift to cremating the dead and burying the ashes in urn fields. This practice spread across the continent, a powerful new idea about death and the body. It coincided with the rise of heavily fortified hill forts, settlements perched on defensible peaks, surrounded by earthen ramparts and wooden palisades. The world was becoming a more dangerous place, even here. Communities were consolidating, defining their territories, and preparing for conflict. The bronze sword evolved into a longer, more lethal slashing weapon, a testament to the changing nature of combat. In Britain, the landscape itself was transformed by ritual. While great circles of stone like Stonehenge were Neolithic in origin, the Bronze Age saw the raising of countless burial mounds, or barrows, across the hills. These were the tombs of local chieftains and elites. The bush barrow, chieftain buried near Stonehenge, was laid to rest with a gold lozenge breastplate, bronze daggers, and a spectacular mace head. His wealth was a product of his connections to the tin and copper trade. His burial mound was a permanent claim on the landscape, a statement of lineage and authority that would watch over the living for centuries. The European Bronze Age was fundamentally a world of chiefs and warriors, of metalworkers and traders. Its monuments were not pyramids, but tombs and fortifications. Its art focused on weapons, ornaments, and symbols of solar power and the sea. It was a participatory age. The effort to build a burial mound or a hill fort required the coordination of a community, forging social bonds through shared labor, just as shared rituals around a hoard of bronze weapons would forge a warband. This was not a primitive prelude to later history. It was a sophisticated, vibrant period where technological innovations like the two-wheeled chariot, the socketed axe, and advanced alloying techniques were adopted and adapted locally. It was an age that laid the foundations for the social structures and mythological landscapes that would later feed into Celtic and Germanic cultures. The memories of this age, of great chiefs, magical swords, and sacred bogs, would echo in the medieval epics and sagas of the region. But as the 12th century BC crisis toppled the palatial systems of the Mediterranean, the shockwaves reached Europe too. The trade networks that brought Baltic amber to Mycenae and Cypriot copper to Britain shuddered and fractured. The familiar sources of tin may have been disrupted. The result was not a sudden collapse, but a gradual transformation, a regionalization. The broad, continent-wide styles faded, replaced by more local forms. The long-distance exchange of prestige goods diminished. Europe, too, settled into a period of greater isolation and localization, a prelude to its own Iron Age. Yet, the seeds of its future were sown in this Bronze Era, in the love of fine metalwork, the importance of warrior prestige, and the deep connection to a landscape marked by tomb and fort. As the global Bronze Age system faded, what lasting legacy did it leave in the human story, not just in objects, but in our very minds? As the last echoes of bronze forging faded into the rise of iron, the age did not simply end. It transformed, sinking into the foundations of everything that would follow. The Bronze Age was humanity's first experience with a complex, interdependent world. It taught us profound and lasting lessons, many etched not in stone, but in the collective memory of our civilizations. Its legacy is not a list of artifacts, but a set of blueprints for how humans organize, create, and believe. What invisible threads connect our modern world to those first smoky forges? Consider the concept of the specialist. Before bronze, most community members possessed a similar set of skills. The metallurgist changed that. The smith was the original scientist-engineer, a keeper of secrets that required years of apprenticeship. This creation of specialized knowledge established a template for all later expertise. The scribe, the architect, the shipwright. It made society more efficient and more unequal, creating hierarchies based on inaccessible skill. Our modern world of professions and technical careers is a direct descendant of that first division of labor born in the Bronze Workshop. The Bronze Age gave us our first taste of globalization. The Ulubran shipwreck, with its cargo from 7 different cultures, is a snapshot of an ancient world system. This interdependence demanded and fostered diplomacy, standardized weights and measures, and early concepts of international law, like the treaty between Egypt and Hutti. It showed humanity both the dazzling benefits of connection and its terrifying fragility. When the network failed, darkness followed. Our own globalized world, with its complex supply chains and diplomatic institutions, is walking a path first traced by those Bronze Age merchants sailing between Cyprus and Sardinia. Perhaps most fundamentally, the Bronze Age solidified the relationship between technology and power. Control of metal meant control of food production through better tools, control of violence through superior weapons, and control of belief through ritual objects. This equation, that technological advantage translates directly into political and social dominance, has driven human history ever since, from the iron swords of the Romans to the nuclear codes of the modern era. The Bronze Age established the game. All subsequent history has been playing it with different pieces. The age also bequeathed to us our first epic stories. The tales that would become the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Iliad, and fragments of myths from the Celtic and Nordic worlds are memories of the Bronze Age, fossilized in poetry. They are stories of hero kings, quests for immortality, colossal cities, and world-shaking wars. They provide a human voice to the archaeology, reminding us that behind every bronze spearhead was a person with desires, fears, and a story to tell. These narratives established archetypes of heroism, tragedy, and the quest for meaning that continue to shape our literature and films today. On a practical level, the Bronze Age was a vast, millennia-long experiment in human ingenuity. The development of lost wax casting, piece mold techniques, alloy chemistry, and large-scale furnace design represented peaks of technical problem-solving that would not be surpassed for centuries. This spirit of experimentation, of bending nature to human will through fire and intelligence, is the very engine of progress. The modern scientific mindset, though far more systematic, has its emotional and intellectual roots in the trial-and-error triumphs of those ancient workshops. As we lie in the quiet dark, separated by millennia from the heat of those furnaces, the connection feels distant. But it is there. In the way our cities are planned, descendants of Mohenjo-Daro's grid and Uruk's specialized districts. In the way we write, using systems descended from the accounting scratches of Mesopotamian scribes. In the very structure of our stories and our understanding that technology changes society, for better and for worse. The Bronze Age was our collective childhood as a civilized species, a time of dazzling first discoveries, painful lessons, and the establishment of patterns we are still living out. The silence that followed its collapse was not an ending, but a necessary pause. The forests regrew over the mines. The great trade routes grew quiet. In that quiet, the knowledge of iron, once a royal secret, could diffuse and democratize. The simpler, tougher Iron Age societies that emerged were built with the lessons, and on the ruins, of their bronze predecessors. They carried forward the memory of kings and gods, the skills of writing and sailing, and the undeniable truth that humanity's fate is tied to its tools. So, as the final echoes of this long journey fade, remember this. We are not so far removed from those ancient metalworkers. We still seek to transform raw materials into instruments of our will. We still build networks that span the globe, knowing they are fragile. We still tell stories to make sense of a world shaped by our own creations. The Bronze Age did not just give us a medal, it gave us a mirror, showing us both our brilliant capacity for creation and our enduring vulnerability. The fire they lit in those Anatolian hills never truly went out. It was merely transferred to a new forge. Thank you for drifting through this deep history with Sleepy Owl. If these journeys into the distant past help you find rest, please consider subscribing for more. And as you slip towards sleep, perhaps ponder this. If you could hold one object from the Bronze Age, a Minoan seal, a Shang ritual vessel, a Mycenaean gold mask, which would you choose, and what do you think it would whisper to you across the centuries? Sweet dreams.